So it's like there's no good place on the wheel to put windows. But here's what I came up with as the solution. Recall the cross-section of the wheels, a square with 3 decks. For just the part being used as the viewing lounge, imagine replacing the lowermost deck with a completely transparent structure made of thick fused plexiglass, thick enough to both contain the internal pressure and serve as radiation shielding. And so you've got a narrow aisle down the middle with the bar stools and tables so that people can have their meals there. And to best see this, let's again go into the model. And the idea is you come down from the upper deck, you stop and get a little something here, and then in you go to the lounge. Now, one limitation of my software is I can move the camera in the scene, but I can't actually animate the elements in the scene. So keep in mind the Earth, of course, would appear to be moving. It would appear to be either rising or setting, depending on which end of the lounge you walked into. And I'm sorry I can't move the camera or turn it as much as you'd like. I don't actually have a complete illusion here. There's not really a whole 3D Earth down there, but I think that's enough to give you the idea. This would be a view to end all views. And the idea is with the narrow aisle there, you can see on your bar stool one side, then by just pivoting around, you can see everything in the other direction. There's actually more than you can see at once. There's such a great view, and so you got everything you paid for. And with the sloping walls like this, it doesn't feel like you're looking through the floor. You kind of are. The Earth is below you there, but it feels more like looking through a sloped wall window. Now, I think of this as kind of the hotel side of the station, and the other side is the NASA side, but I would absolutely want the NASA crew to be welcome to come over to this side and have their meals there also. Not only would they enjoy it, I think the hotel guests would get a big kick out of it also, because they'd be able to talk with people who are either on their way to the moon or later Mars, or perhaps had already been there, and think about who's going to have better stories to tell over drinks and dinner than somebody who's been to the freaking moon, right? So the guests could get their autographs and get their little selfie pictures taken with them and all that kind of thing. So it's a great example of the kind of synergy you can get if you combine multiple functions into a single facility. So a few more external views. Okay, so moving equipment around is going to be necessary to keep the thing balanced. Sometimes you might need to move from one outdoor area to the other. So to do this, I advise a freight elevator on a vertical track where the elevator car is just a platform where you can drive things right up, where you can drive things right up onto it. And then the track takes it clear across the station, passing over the hub as you see here. You notice a couple things about the track. One, it has this funny twisting shape I'll explain in a moment, and also it has to pass through the lower mirror, so a part of that has to act like a door and kind of open up to admit the elevator car. But the reason for the twisting business, you can see, if you look through the edge of the station here with the elevator car in the foreground, if you try to just go straight across, you'll collide with the hub, and you can't really move that out of the way. So instead, as the car rises, the track gives it this half twist, so that by the time it reaches the hub, it's facing on the other side. And as it continues, it half twists back again. Now, if that's all it did, by the time it got to the other side, it would also be upside down. So one other thing the car has to do is that as it reaches the hub here, it pauses, and the platform part rotates around 180 degrees. Then it continues, half twist back, and there you go. So this appears like it'll work, but the one unfortunate thing about this approach is that by passing over the hub that way, the track makes it very hard to use that end of the hub for any other purpose, which is a shame because that's a unique piece of real estate on any wheel station concept. We're already using the other end of the hub for other things. And in particular, there's one thing that we might need to use this for. I've talked about having the equipment aboard the station and moving around. But I haven't talked about how you ever get it aboard the station in the first place. You can't bring it aboard where the people come through those little airlocks up top. Normally what you need to do is dock with the end of the station to transfer it. But that didn't seem possible here. So once again, I looked at other people's concepts, everyone I could find, and once again, they all seem to have problems. So I was trying to figure out how to make any of these work, especially when I have the stupid track in the way. And then I realized, well, wait a minute. I got this elevator car, it goes to the hub and flips around 180 degrees. Suppose you brought it there and just rotated the car against the station's own rotational motion so as to exactly cancel it out. Then the platform or the elevator car would appear to be stationary to an approaching spacecraft. So now, all the spacecraft has to do is, if it comes on in this direction, if it's carrying a big piece of equipment for testing like this, and if it's mounted at a right angle as you see there, then it would simply have to place it against the back wall of the elevator platform. So if you just place it up against that, and if the elevator car has some kind of mechanism that could kind of grab hold of anything you put on it, once that was done, the spacecraft could just detach from the mechanism or from its payload and back away, and that's it. Then the elevator car spins back up again, or despins, depending on your perspective, and brings it down to the rim. And that way the spacecraft never has to do any like rotating of its own to match the station. It doesn't even have to do any precise hard docking, which I think is about as easy as you can make it for the spacecraft. And then when you're done testing, you're ready to take the equipment off, you just reverse the process, and now the spacecraft just has to approach and kind of pluck the cargo off the back of the elevator car and take it to its final destination. So, that being the case, it seems like the elevator car is kind of acting like a docking target. So I thought, well, maybe I should put some markings on it or something to help the spacecraft. But then I looked at it from this angle and realized, heck, that whole station's one big docking target. Look at all those concentric circles. So if you just line those up, you should be in good shape. Okay, recent addition, what I call triple function cables, highlighted here in color. These each have a weight on them that can be moved up and down the cable by motorized pulleys. And this does three things for you. One, it's an easy way to adjust the speed of the station's rotation. As mass comes and goes, the speed is going to change, which will change the gravity levels. So to keep those consistent, rather than constantly fire rocket fuel to adjust the speed, you can just use this to change the moment of inertia. So station spins faster, station spins slower. You can also use it to adjust the CG. As I mentioned before, if that gets off axis and the station starts to wobble, this is an easy way to do that. And that would work in both axes. Finally, you can also use it to suppress unwanted spin modes, in particular precession, whereas wobble is in plane, precession is more of that kind of motion, and you can use this to actively damp that out. And the cool thing is that if the weights are equal and you move them pairwise as I've shown, you can use this, these functions are all independent of one another, meaning that I can change the speed without affecting the CG, I can change the CG without affecting the speed, and I can do this third function without affecting either of the others, which means that a single computer controller can simultaneously perform all these functions with this one simple system. Okay, so I think you got the idea of how the wheel works now, so I'd like to take you back into SketchUp and show you what it'd be like to be standing in one of those outdoor areas. So here's our phase 2 lunar wheel. So imagine that's you right there. So in one direction you see the elevator car. Then if you looked overhead, what you would see reflected in the mirror would be the sun shining down onto you. Then in the other direction, a spoke, a skylight, and the hangar. Now, you can see the hub by turning sideways, but keep in mind, the hub is starting above you and extending into the distance, and so from this vantage point, it actually appears to be upside down. Also would appear to be rotating, of course, as the wheel turns. And then down there, the primary mirror in the distance, which would actually be hard to pick out because it would be reflecting the star field. Oops. Okay, so finally, the Mars expansion phase. To get the higher gravity of Mars, you can't just spin the wheel faster. It's already spinning about as fast as it ought to, conservatively speaking, with about a 2 RPM limit. So you have to go bigger, and there's a number of ways you can add a larger wheel to the station. This represents schematically what we've seen up to now with the indoor areas, the outdoor areas, the spokes, and so forth. To add a larger Mars wheel, as I said, there's ways you can do it. I decided on a wheel that spins at the same rate as this one and is rigidly attached to the lunar wheel, and actually in the same plane as the lunar wheel, so that the lunar wheel becomes the inner wheel and the Mars becomes the outer wheel. But the Mars wheel would actually be so much larger than the lunar wheel, it's actually a lot more than we need. So my conclusion was we really only need more like half of a Mars wheel. With this kind of configuration, you can see you still have plenty of room for both indoor and outdoor areas. The spokes line up nicely with existing ones. And because of the way the outdoor areas line up, you can take that elevator track here and simply extend it. And now that single elevator can serve 4 different outdoor areas. The cross section here is exactly the same as here, so you can build it with the same tools and techniques perfected earlier. And of course, a major reason for leaving out these quadrants is you've got a viewing lounge on one side and you don't want to block the view. and on the other side is the algae system, and you don't want to block the sunlight. So the Mars sections would have their own algae systems, grow their own food, all of which means that the inner wheel can continue to function very much as before, despite the fact that they've almost tripled the amount of enclosed volume in the station. Now, you do have to do more structurally, however. I don't want the spoke to take all this stress. So to do that, notionally, I've added some structural support cables in these positions, where each cable goes and divides as it approaches the hub, and then recombines on the other side so as not to put stress on the hub. And so the two endpoints are kind of supporting one another. I also added some structural trusses to the outdoor areas to make sure that they would behave as rigid bodies. And then we are ready for the grand finale then. So here then is our phase 2 station. I've raised the mirror mast a little bit. And that's with the Mars edition. You also have to generate more electrical power, so I expanded this, as shown. And then finally you have to expand the upper mirror also, like so. And there you have it. And if you want to talk about this offline later, I can zoom in there and show you any of these details however you like. So there is your Mars Proving Ground area. And the station altogether provides every possible combination, all 4 combinations of both gravity, no gravity, pressure, and vacuum. Allocation, as I mentioned before, kind of a hotel side and a NASA side, and then among the Mars arcs, you could have the crews training here, the geology lab up there, test the equipment and agronomy over here, and that would leave a remaining quadrant that I'd like to perhaps use for the asteroid miners. I just recently came to realize that this station could be just as valuable to them as to all the others, and so there's potentially a 5th constituency that might be able to help fund this and assemble a critical mass of support to actually get it done. So compared to other things we built in space, it's not outrageously large, even in the phase 3. It kind of seems like a next logical step toward building cities in space. So the resulting configuration, I know, is very unlike anything anyone has proposed before, but I think it has a kind of logic to it, which I hope makes sense to you. And provisionally, I've been calling it SkyWheel. I believe it meets all those requirements that I set out for myself at the outset, and it does so by serving a variety of customers in a variety of functions. It grows in increments, and it has potential for commercial operation. And best of all, it does a whole boatload of risk reduction for space settlement. I packed in everything I could think of. So what's next? Well, I'd sure like your inputs to help refine the concept. I made some business cards. Dr. Gale, would you pass those around to the audience? Oh, you did?
We got more. Anybody didn't get a business card?
Yeah, feel free to take more than one. They're not expensive. If you know anyone else back home who might be interested. I'm also looking for opportunities to present this. As I said, I'm not an insider, so if any of you can help open doors to other interested parties, please let me know. And I'm looking forward to perhaps talking about the asteroid mining. That actually turned into a whole separate presentation. I've got like 20 different ways in which this could help asteroid mining, so I'm looking for a chance to tell them about that. In future years, I hope to be able to tell you more about that station I call the Outpost, which would actually build space colonies, and what those first space colonies might consist of as well. So I ran a little over, but thanks so much for your time. It's been great talking to you. Thank you. Oh, excellent. Yes, in the back.
I found your viewing deck intriguing, but lacking transparent aluminum. What were you going to make that transparent material out of?
Well, I was assuming plexiglass, but probably coated on the outside with a thin layer of I think it's called vapor deposited glass or sapphire. I don't know how thick it would have to be because it has to do several functions, and I've tried reading about radiation, as Dr. Gloss was suggesting. It's a very confusing topic, so I'm trying to determine what the minimum is that would be required, and I'm not really sure. I have some indications, but I'm just kind of guessing at this point. What I'm more concerned about is actually the optical distortion that might result because the glass is going to be rather thick. If that's the case, we may have to make those hotel room windows, they may have to be flat actually rather than curved. I've got a friend working to help me illustrate that, and I haven't seen the results yet. Yes, here, John.
Okay, I see two things that make your design very useful. For one, gives you these separate isolated sections. Would be for testing of animal lifespans and animal reproduction under lunar and Mars gravity conditions. Two, just what you've already shown would be very adaptable to an asteroid smelter because of the relatively open design. The fact that you could bring asteroidal materials which need some gravity to properly process. Unless somebody has a magic wand, you can instantly create an entire microgravity and mineral processing system, which is kind of unlikely. That it could be close to an asteroid and be part of the where you turn asteroid minerals into metals and whatever.
Yes, and
that would be very, very useful for both of those applications.
when I create the outpost, I've started to model the follow-on station that evolves from SkyWheel. I intend to include mineral processing for either lunar mining or asteroidal, and I'm going to try to get into those details. It might take a couple of years before I'm ready to present that, but I appreciate the comment.
I'm not sure what gravity level you want for the asteroid mining, but for the animal reproductive test, you want obviously lunar gravity, Mars gravity, which you already have. So that would
Yeah.
work fine.
Well, part of what we would do for the asteroid guys is to just process their stuff, in which case probably the more gravity the better. You don't particularly want low gravity in that case, and by offloading some of the more difficult tasks, they don't have to solve as many problems of doing things in zero G is part of the idea. Since I have some additional time, do you mind if I went to a couple of my backup slides that I was wanting to show?
We just need to allow enough time that we can get the original computer hooked up.
Oh, right, that should take just a moment. I've recently determined that I've actually probably got way more algae in there than is really necessary, so in the future versions you might see some of this replaced with photovoltaic cells. A cool thing about the Mars outdoor area is that you can take the hangar in the Mars area and actually pressurize it to equal the composition and pressure of the Mars atmosphere to get a totally complete simulation of the Mars conditions. For most equipment that wouldn't matter, but think of, for example, a methane fuel processing facility of the kind Robert Zubrin has talked about. There really would be no other opportunity to truly test that on Earth before sending such a piece of critical equipment to Mars. Yes?
Should I ask this question a while ago? How much power do you have available for experiments in the current?
I don't know.
I don't really see any big solar arrays.
Well, I had just the solar thermal, and then as I was saying, there's room to add PV arrays if needed. I tried determining what the power requirement would be just for resident, and there's a little bit of NASA data out there, just for supporting people living aboard the thing. It wasn't very consistent. The data is kind of all over the map, and I'm not an expert, but I just made the solar thermal thing as big as it could be to fit. And if it needs to be even bigger, there may be other things we can do to either expand that. It starts to cause other problems, though. The more functions you try to accomplish in a single facility and more tightly integrated it is, the harder it is to adjust one thing to accommodate a new requirement. Do you have any suggestions that you think would be the best way of expanding?
Well, I mean, if you don't have much power, it's going to limit what you can do.
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of looking at the applications that you want and asking yourself, well, how much power do they need?
Right. Which is a little hard for me to get my arms around, but I'm happy to take any suggestions.
Well, you probably find that there's like one or two applications that totally drive the power. And if you can handle everything else, you'll be happy with that. So that's the trick, is to identify which ones are going to be the powerhouse. And maybe say, well, we're not going to do that.
Okay.
Your question next.
Yes.
You have, if I understood you correctly, you have the fuel depot on one side of the spin interface and the non-spinning part above it. And so the fuels are for rotating.
Well-
And my question in my mind is, how are you going to get the fuel across that spin interface?
Yes. That is the single tricky thing. I don't have an illustration of the one idea I had, but there are ways to cross the boundary. It's just a matter of the amount of pressure that it takes to keep it sealed. As I said, this is one of the single trickiest things about it. But the people who propose these kind of spinning fuel depots they've made these proposals. I don't know the details of. I don't have insight into what their designs were and how they plan to deal with it. I just know that it's been proposed by others. So I was kind of willing to take it on faith that there must be a reasonable way to deal with that. Although I have some ideas of my own, just in case they'll seem to be inadequate.
I don't understand why you have to have the fuel part of it.
Well, you don't have to. There are fuel depots that are proposed that don't spin. I was trying to get the most function out of the pieces. Over and over, I try to use things for more than one purpose whenever possible. So in this case, I wanted the fuel to be available to use for spin balancing and as practice for risk reduction on the other things. That's not a totally compelling reason, so if that's more trouble than it's worth, we could certainly change it as you're suggesting. Yes?
It seemed that the Mars portion was not a complete torus.
Right, that's the idea.
Wouldn't that put some pressures that would make the, I'm trying to explain it, but basically those legs, it would be like if you think about hanging something from something that's angled, and put like a chain down there.
Right.
Try to bring them together. Would it be more stable if you just completed that all the way?
Well,
Would it be pretty unstable just to have those two sections?
it would be easier if it was a complete wheel. It'd be a whole lot more structure. That's why I added these structural elements that I was talking about. These support cables, there may need to be more of them. I'm not sure. They're kind of unsightly, so I was not in a hurry to put in more than I thought were the minimum. But you could add as many of those as necessary, and it will hold its shape as it turns. And the other key thing, I added those structural braces to make sure that the Mars arcs didn't try to kind of bend. So that's another part of the solution. There are other ways of stiffening it, and this isn't necessarily the ideal way, but it's just one way that seemed to at least make sense to me. All I was looking for is at least one plausible way of doing everything needed. It doesn't have to be the best way at this point in the concept development. That's the way I looked at it. Yes. You think so?
Well, if you're not pressurizing anything, it's going to be cheaper than pressurized. It's just a structural.
Right. Well, that's the thought. Thank you. In the back there? Yes.
My question is about cable. Like your PT said, you can adjust the center of gravity or the rotational speed.
Yes.
Outer layers, mass is huge. How can you assure that if we alter the position of the weights that's being suspended in the cable, we could actually create an obvious change in these positions? I mean minor change.
When the door was closed, I missed part of what you were saying. Because someone near him, you were talking about changing the weights and the position of the weights and the triple function cables. Okay, what was the concern you had?
I suppose to make these changes, you have to give the cable because the outer layer's mass is huge, so
Yes.
actually to change it in the center of gravity or it might be minor.
Well, the thing about those weights on the triple function cables is the more weight they have, the more effective they are for all those purposes. So they'll give you as much help as you put into them in the mass you're willing to devote to them. And there's also an opportunity to put additional weights on the Mars section. I didn't show that, but there are additional cables out there to contribute to the same purpose. So you have the opportunity to have more if you think you need it. And you could also put additional cables outside the station, hanging out into space for additional control if that turns out to be needed. But really, you just keep adding mass to it, and they become more and more effective. I can't quite hear you. I'm sorry. I think we're out of time. Maybe you can talk to me afterward. Oh, I wanted to mention, I have a stack of these little giveaways, if you'd like. I'll put them on the back table for you to get on your way out. Thank you very much for your time once again. Yep. Oh, thank you.